When Margaret Chen shuffled into the Fifth Avenue coffee house that Monday morning, nobody gave her a second glance. Her coat was worn. Her shoes were scuffed. At 67 years old, she looked like just another elderly woman counting coins for her morning coffee. But Margaret Chen wasn't just anyone. Nobody knew that this ordinary-looking woman had the power to shut this place down before lunchtime. And she was watching everything. David Martinez had been awake since 4 in the morning. This was his second shift in 18 hours. At 28, he should have been chasing promotions, building a future. Instead, he was steaming milk and pulling espresso shots to keep his mother alive. Stage 4 cancer doesn't wait for dreams. The bills were piling up faster than he could work them off. But when customers stepped up to the counter, none of that showed. "Good morning, Mr. Patterson. Usual cappuccino?" "Mrs. Roberts, how's your granddaughter doing?" To David, people weren't orders. They were stories. His manager hated that. "You're here to make coffee, Martinez. Not friends." David just nodded and kept working. Kindness was the one thing exhaustion hadn't taken from him yet. Margaret waited her turn in line. She watched the way David worked, fast hands, tired eyes, steady voice. When she reached the counter, she opened her wallet. Coins spilled into her palm. Her hands trembled slightly as she counted them again. And then again. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I thought I had enough." David didn't hesitate. "It's okay," he said, already reaching for a cup. "Coffee's on me today." Margaret looked up. "I couldn't." He smiled, gentle but firm. "Please. It's just coffee." She nodded, embarrassed. "Thank you." As she stepped aside, she noticed something she hadn't expected. David wasn't looking at her clothes. Or her coins. He was looking at her face. The door swung open hard. A man in a tailored suit strode in, phone to his ear, voice sharp. "Yeah, tell them I want the numbers now." He cut straight to the counter, stopping inches from Margaret. "I'll have a black coffee," he said. Margaret cleared her throat. "I believe I was next." The man glanced at her once. Long enough to dismiss her. "I'm in a hurry," he said. "Some of us actually work." David's hand paused mid-pour. "Sir," he said evenly, "she was first." The man exhaled through his nose. "Get your manager." James appeared almost instantly. "What seems to be the problem?" David spoke up. "This customer was in line." James didn't look at Margaret. He looked at the suit. "Serve him," James said. "Now." David hesitated. The room felt tight. Then he turned back to the counter, and slid the coffee toward Margaret. "I'm sorry for the wait, ma'am." James's face hardened. "My office. Now." As David stepped away, Margaret touched his hand. "Thank you," she said softly. And for the first time that morning, she opened her phone. David didn't make it back to the counter. James closed the office door behind him. "You embarrassed a customer," James said flatly. "I followed the line," David replied. James slid a paper across the desk. "A written warning." "One more incident," James said, "and you're gone." David stared at the paper. He thought of his mother. Of the hospital bills. Of how close everything already was to falling apart. "I understand," he said quietly. James nodded, satisfied. "Good. Now get back to work." That night, David's phone rang as he was locking up. It was the hospital. Another insurance denial. The balance had climbed again. If they couldn't pay within 2 weeks, they would need to discuss alternatives. David didn't ask what that meant. He already knew. Margaret came back the next morning. And the morning after that. Always the same coffee. Always the same corner seat. Always watching. She saw David slip his own cash into the register to cover a drink for a man who couldn't pay. She watched him stay late to help a younger employee who was shaking after being yelled at. And she watched James. How his voice changed depending on who stood in front of him. On the fifth day, the rush hit just before noon. Orders stacked up. Cups lined the counter. James barked commands from behind David's shoulder. An elderly man stepped forward, hands shaking as he studied the menu. "Take your time," David said gently. James snapped. "We don't have time. Order or step aside." The man's hands trembled harder. David glanced at the clock. 13 days. Then he looked back at the man. "What sounds good to you today?" David asked. James grabbed David's arm. "Corporate's reviewing stores this week," he hissed. "I'm recommending you for termination. You're done." David didn't pull away. "Okay," he said quietly. From the corner table, Margaret watched everything. She opened her phone, and made a call. David arrived the next morning early. His mother's hospice paperwork was already on his phone. Margaret was seated in her usual corner. She looked up when David entered and gave him a small, unreadable smile. Then the door opened. 5 people entered together. Not customers. Executives. James rushed forward, breathless. "Welcome, everything's ready for inspection." One of them stopped him. "We're looking for Margaret Chen." The room went still. James frowned. "I'm sorry, who?" From the corner table, Margaret stood. She set her coffee down. Removed her worn coat. The room changed. "I'm right here," she said. James stared. "Margaret Chen," she continued calmly. "Owner of this location." Silence. Then she looked at James. "Shall we talk?" James couldn't find his voice. The executive team moved past him, spreading through the store. Checking terminals. Reviewing reports. Watching security footage on a tablet. Margaret didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She turned to James. "You warned this employee for showing patience," she said. "You threatened termination for showing respect." James swallowed. "I was following policy." She gestured toward the footage playing silently. "Yesterday, you humiliated an elderly customer. I watched you do it. You created fear in a place meant to serve people." James opened his mouth. Margaret raised a hand. "You don't need to explain. I've seen enough." She looked to the executive beside her. "Escort Mr. Morrison out. Effective immediately." James didn't protest. He didn't argue. He just looked at David, once, as security guided him toward the door. The store felt quieter the moment he left. Margaret turned to David. He was still standing behind the counter, hands resting on the edge, knuckles white. "David," she said, gently now. "I owe you an apology." David shook his head. "I was just doing my job." She paused. "I've watched you for 7 days. You chose patience when it cost you. You chose kindness when it put everything at risk." David's voice broke. "My mother. I don't know how much time." Margaret stepped closer. "I've reviewed your performance. Not just this week. Your entire time here." She handed him a folder. "Inside is an offer to manage this location. Immediately. With full benefits." David stared. "And there's more," she added. "Our company has a medical assistance program." She met his eyes. "It will cover your mother's care." David exhaled, hard. Like he'd been holding his breath for years. "I don't know what to say," he said. Margaret shook her head. "You don't have to. Just don't change." 3 months later, David unlocked the door to the Fifth Avenue location just before sunrise. The place was quiet. He brewed the first pot of coffee himself. Behind the counter, a framed photo sat beside the register, his mother, smiling. Margaret sat in her usual corner, waiting. David carried her coffee over. "Black," he said. "Like always." She smiled. "You remembered." "I remember everyone," he said. She looked around the store. Different energy. Different pace. "Nothing feels rushed in here anymore," she said. David shrugged. "People don't need to be rushed, life is hard enough." Margaret nodded once. They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, the morning crowd began to gather. Margaret stood, buttoned her coat, and stepped outside. David turned back to the counter as the bell rang above the door. "Good morning," he said.